and there is an art of negotiation. And so when we think about concessions, before you can really think about concessions, we have to first be prepared to negotiate.
Doing the same thing that we hate consumers do when they come into the funeral, with prices and everything. Welcome everybody to episode 12 of Take It to the Bank. Tim Bridgers, Live Oak Bank, Ryan Thogmartin, Disrupt Media. I'm not a banker. I don't know a whole lot about finance, but I'm telling you what, Tim, being in proximity to you, I have learned a ton.
I'm glad to hear that.
I have learned a ton. And so I'm excited about this conversation because this conversation has been probably the biggest news source in death care over the last 7 or 8 years, and it's acquisition, it's buying and selling.
Yep.
And we're going to talk today about how to negotiate buying and selling. Like what do you need to be thinking of? What are some factors in that on both sides of the table that you need to be aware of? And one of the things you said to me in conversation when we were talking about this, you said price isn't everything. And when I'm buying something, I'm trying to figure out, what do you mean by price isn't everything?
Yeah, so I know for me, and consumers are always going to be at a different stage of their life and situations, and let's be sensitive to that, of course. But I know for me that I always try to, when I buy a product or service, I'm always trying to analyze the quality of the service or the product in addition to the price.
Yeah.
I never just go for the cheapest option. If anything, I'm always questioning why the option is the cheapest, right? And so to that comment, I think that if you are just purely making decisions on pricing, such as the lowest rate, you could get yourself in a situation to where what you were told early is not, in fact, what you find out later. You could have some surprises. Some people call that a bait and switch, right? You don't want that. You want transparency. You want clarity. So I think that in banking and finance, you got to be really careful to make sure that the person that is guiding you in that process has your best interest in mind, and that's your success.
Right. That's good. Yeah. That's good. And I mean, that's I often say when it comes to death care, like sometimes we get stuck doing the same thing that we hate consumers do when they come into the funeral home, or prices and everything. Well, but then when we as death care professionals go look for partners or things, we start to revert back to the thing that we hate that consumers do the most.
That's right.
And so you got to look at that whole package. Concessions. Let's talk about concessions a little bit. And we're not talking about a Clark bar or Kit Kat at a concession stand. What are we talking about when we say concessions?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about concessions, you're really talking about an element of negotiation. So let's unpack negotiating for a minute, right? Negotiating is one of those things that when you hear it, a lot of people want to avoid it, and they get a little nervous about it. I relate to this actually at Keenan Flagler. I was actually dreading my negotiating course, and now that it's all over, looking back, it was one of my favorite courses. Okay, and it was my favorite because I realized in that course that we are in negotiating situations almost every day of our lives.
Sure.
We're either negotiating with ourselves or we're negotiating with somebody in our family. I feel like I'm negotiating with my kids or teenagers all the time now, right?
1,000%.
Oh, you want some phone time? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Dad, can I get my phone back? Right? So we're negotiating all the time. And then when you think about business, right, you think about work. You're negotiating with your manager to get promoted or to get an opportunity to have the next project. We're doing this. So let's think about negotiating in terms of an acquisition. It's everything. Yeah. Okay? And there is an art of negotiation. And so when we think about concessions, before you can really think about concessions, we have to first be prepared to negotiate. So what I would say to an individual that's looking to buy and getting ready to talk about price before they ever step foot in the cafe to have the first conversation with the seller at the coffee shop, they should have their aspiration price in mind. They should have the most they will pay, right? And then they should almost simulate out what they think the seller is going to do based on their first move and have a response in place, okay? That planning is just going to have them aware. That's going to also help them not act out of fear inside of a conversation.
Sure.
Right? Because I will tell you this, there are a lot of sophisticated business owners out there that are selling a business that have already done that prep in preparation for that conversation. I guarantee it.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
So,
and Live Oak can help with that prep.
Yeah. We could talk you through what we've seen work well in the past. We obviously can't tell you what to offer.
Sure.
But we certainly can say, what is the reason that you are willing to pay that price? Mm-hmm. And we, have you seen the financials? Okay. Can you tell me what the net operating income is or the EBITDA is? So we can kind of at least see if there is some substance behind their numbers. And if there's not, and we've done this, we have asked them to hit pause. We have asked them to send us that. And then we will come back and say, yeah, you're actually in the ballpark, So I think preparation for negotiation. And then concessions, I think concession comes after you are starting to dial into an agreed upon price.
Okay.
Concessions start to be the part where you're like, okay, you know what? You're pretty close to my aspiration, and I'm thinking this. What about this? Can you throw in that Hearst, those receivables or that cash that's on the balance sheet? Can we maintain 50% of that, or can we do a non-compete, and I'll pay you that price? So there's concessions, I think, come after the preparation for negotiation.
Beautiful. How important is it, if we're talking about negotiating, buying, selling, that you know your opposition?
Oh, my goodness. Well, again, you in negotiating, you have to actually play out and map out possible outcomes to your first offer or your counteroffer. And before you counteroffer, you certainly have to play the game. Sure. You have to, and playing the game is sitting down and actually thinking about what this individual is how they're going to respond. Without knowing something about the individual, their characteristics, somewhat of their personality, you'll never be able to map that out. So as a part of negotiating, some people actually have an interaction with an individual, and it is purely relational, simply to get a gauge of their personality and their approach to conversations to better negotiate in the future. Wow. That takes patience and discipline.
Yeah, it takes a lot.
Yep.
All right. One of the things that your team in a strategy conversation talked about was a walk-away number and how valuable it is to have a walk-away number.
Yep.
And you talked to earlier episode, we talked about just when we want to buy something, how excited we get about wanting to buy it. And sometimes that excitement can even cloud judgment of what we're willing to pay. So the walk-away number is what?
Well, again, as I said, when you're first establishing your aspiration price, which is what you want to pay, okay? But on the other end of that, you're establishing your bottom line, okay? Your bottom line is your walk-away number. But you have to be committed to walk away if you are above that bottom line number, okay? Now, your bottom line number is going to be above your aspiration price, right? Because you're not going to aspire to pay the most. Right, you're going to aspire to pay a certain percentage of that. So you just have to be disciplined to walk away and realize there's probably going to be another opportunity. And you know what, though? The individual may come back. But I think with them seeing that discipline in you, I actually think that adds strength to your case. And it lets the other party know that they're not going to be able to manipulate's probably a strong word in this scenario, but I think we can use it in the context of negotiating. They're not going to be able to manipulate you in a certain price, and I think that adds strength to your case.
So good. All right, I have one more point that I want to ask about.
Yep.
and I heard you say before that making the first offer isn't always a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a part of your preparation and the person that you are dealing with. Okay, you got to remember that making the first offer, you're setting the bar and you're setting the pace. Okay, let me give you an example. If me and you are negotiating, and I think that your reaction to the first offer, which I'm going to make low, I'm going to make below my aspiration price. Okay? If I think that that's going to cause you to literally get up and say, I'm not going to work with you, and I've heard this in the funeral profession many times, that there have been sellers that are offended by the offer and will not talk to those buyers anymore. If you think that is potential, then that is going to impact your first offer. Okay? Sometimes the first offer can actually be a conversation and a question, or your first, you making the first move is actually a question. So I know this is not a direct answer, but I really think it depends on the audience and whether or not you are comfortable making a first. If you feel like you can get away with it, then I personally would like to make the first offer, and I would like to make it below my aspiration price if I think that person's going to come in at or below my aspiration price as a counter.
That's good. All right. Okay, I got one more.
All right.
Here we go. Research. How important is it to do your due diligence in your research?
Well, one, if you're not doing your due diligence that we've discussed on prior podcast here about, but let's talk about if you're a seller. It's not just about the buyer, right? If you're a seller and you've not done adequate research in terms of valuations, you've not been preparing, you've not done a cash flow analysis, you're not sure what the opinion of a bank is, knowing your buyer is going to need financing, then you're not going to be in a real good spot to negotiate, okay? Because if you are in a good spot to negotiate and you know that your other party is going to need financing, then that sets the expectation for your aspiration price, okay? So you're making it more successful already. You're putting it in a realistic range, okay? So if you're not prepared, you're going to ask for a price way up here. It's way above the bottom line price of the other party, and it's over. And that happens all the time, okay? So even as a seller, you got to do your research. Who's your other party? And then obviously, I think it's obvious for the buyer. I think way, way, way before you could ever get to the negotiating table of a deal, you've got to be able to understand at least an idea of the success of this business and the potential, the risk through the SWOT analysis, the market, how the market is changing. If you can't get access to the financials, at least get a summary from the seller. And again, without that, I'm not sure how you can negotiate. Yeah. Because you don't know what you're negotiating.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's everything.
That's so good. And I think that's a good culmination of a lot of what we've talked about. Live Oak helping with the strategic planning, the strategy around it, knowing what your offer can be, knowing what your walk away number is.
That's right.
And helping with those negotiations. So awesome. Well, that's some good information, Tim, that you can take to the bank.
Absolutely. Thank you.